You are a scientist working at the Department of Energy. Now, many people know that the Department of Energy is highly compartmentalized, let alone the, I guess you could say, very secretive compartments relative to that within the private contracting industry. However, let's make this very, very simple. You're a scientist with above top secret clearance with some clearance into SAPs, which stands for Special Access Programs. You're a scientist working in the Los Alamos area in one of the deep underground military bases, and there are only 2 or 3 other scientists in general that know of the compartment in which you work in, literally and physically and metaphorically as well too, pertaining to the program and all that stuff. You are working one evening from, say, 11 p.m. till about 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. It's a little bit of a strange, work hour schedule, but as many people have said in the past, like, Bob Lazar, Lou Elizondo, you name it, there are very odd times and hours in which you are called in to do work, especially when it has to do with compartmentalization pertaining to a particular program. And all of a sudden, you turn around and you see somebody in the facility with you. And you go, excuse me, you're not allowed to be here. You don't know who this individual is. Like I said, only 2 or 3 other scientists, at least that you know of, know where you work, what you're working on, you name it, because you have to sort of cross-reference some research with them and you've been given permission. This person immediately turns around and they take their hand and they start motioning their hand and their arm in a circular sort of way in front of their chest. Next thing you know, all of a sudden, you wake up in your bed and it's evening time in your home and you look and you check the date and it's 6 days later, okay? Now, with that being said, you're going to see how that example comes full circle very shortly. However, today's episode is called S.A.T.A.N. Okay, and S.A.T.A.N stands for Strategic Alignment of Targeted Assets and Necessities. Now, harvesting Loosh to reverse EXO-ATMOSPHERIC Introns via their Gang-Stalking satellite, in brackets Russia, is the full title. Now, we will break down very fundamentally and very strongly what all of this means. However, I do want to say a couple things. We do have a Patreon. It does help support the show. We do everything from, one-on-one to group Zoom calls. We have 2 to 4 times per week members-only episodes. You can tell us episodes to do. There's content out there on the Patreon right now that will not be available to the public for at least another 1 to 2 weeks at the very minimum. We have exclusive interviews with people on there, so many other things as well too, footage. You could research with us in real time if you're on the Telegram and things like that. Anyways, I do want to give a shout out as well too to Leo. Brother, happy birthday, Leo. Your father is a phenomenal guy. I wish you nothing but the best. I'd also like to give a shout out to the guy who sent Camden and myself a very kind donation a few days ago. Don't remember your name, sir, but I would like to thank you so much. You know who you are. And would also like to give a shout out to Jay Waltz, Militant Funk, Mrs. Biggs, and Rena. I have to thank you guys so much for the things you send as it pertains to data, information. And not just that, but the support, and I will be getting to more shout-outs soon. But anyways, let's break down the overall fundamental topics that we're looking at here. So first off, what is an intron, okay? According to Wikipedia, an intron, for introgenic region in any nucleotide sequence within a gene, okay, that is removed by RNA splicing during maturation of the final NRA product. Now, before I go on, I just want to make this very clear. This has nothing to do with, technically we could extrapolate and speculate, and it could absolutely have to do with, pertaining to what's going on in the world right now, but that's not the point of this. It's a total coincidence, or is it, right? Anyways, in other words, introns are non-coding regions of an NRA transcript or the DNA encoding it that are eliminated by splicing before translation. The word intron is derived from the term introgenic region, example, a region inside of a gene. Okay, the term intron refers to both the DNA sequence within a gene and the corresponding sequence in RNA transcripts. Sequences that are joined together in the final mature RNA after RNA splicing are exons, end quote. Now, we're going to tie this back into the exo-atmospheric aspect of things pertaining to what's been described here in the title. However, what we first need to understand specifically is that we notice here a region inside a gene, okay? Let's keep that part in mind very strongly. Why? There are different regions relative to, certain subatomic structures within a gene, within an atom, within a, an isotope, you name it. One of those regions substantiates the feeding of what is called Loosh. Now, a lot of people might say, okay, what is Loosh? According to prophecyseeker.proboards.com, again, not exactly a mainstream media website, there's many other places you could find to define this, but I found this to be the best. We'll take a look here. Once there was, and I quote, there was a Monroe Institute. The related offshoots and derivations of that type of experimentation and research soon became the specialized, highly refined activities and techniques of Area 51 and Montauk for for military and defense objectives, so-called, and the pop music entertainment industries and institutional pedophilia as they particularly are today. As a type of spiritual energy identified by Monroe, capitalized upon by the secret services and black ops, and exploited as a social engineering utility by the interdimensional negatives, Loosh essentially is of the earth planes, lower dimensions or lower density energy, if you will, right? And the trauma energy of the human and animal emotional body, for example, via the cruelty imposed upon and endured by the animal kingdom and the brutality of the abattoir. As negative emotional energy, especially the energy of pain, trauma, stress, abuse, suffering, or as what Georgie very rightfully described as dreadful Loosh, it contains the heightened molecular content and organic hormonal adrenaline cortisol cascades coursing through the quantum dynamics of blood, body, and brain systems. Under such intense extremity of trauma, the blood and flesh is, for the negative entities, thus highly enriched and hence highly prized, their brand of premium gold, caviar, diamond steak, as it were, end quote. Now, think about, for example, okay, if all of this were to be purportedly true based on the different data patterns and consistency of evidence in which we've covered and seen in many episodes publicly, and also especially in the members on Patreon very recently, what we have to understand here is that, again, this is one section in which is simply amplified, one section of the gene, okay, and of the isotope and of the different subatomic structures within the mind that is derivative of that, of what we would call neurology, where we can actually find the sort of connect, or at least think we found the connect between the VMAT2 gene and the God gene, if you will, right? Now, this is one region in which is amplified for the benefit of these interdimensional beings, the Archons, the reptilians, you name it, right? Whether the reptilians or certain factions of them are serving the Archons and what have you is up for speculation. Many people tend to believe in this. I tend to lean in that direction too. However, it's not for me to push my personal perspectives on you folks, as many of you know. Now, let's take a look at this particular document right here, okay? The language of our DNA, scalar energy. All right. According to researchers, and I quote, by Jair Rivera Dugenio, PhD, according to researchers Graisna Frazier and Franz Bludorf, DNA is influenced by words and frequencies. Okay, this is not necessarily anything new for those that have been watching the show for a while, but take a look at this. Cosmic anatomy. The physical atomic form of the current Homo sapien 2 species is built upon the spirit form, the dark matter form, and the light form structures. The term form refers to a very specific part of the individual transharmonic multidimensional anatomy, as each form is highly intricate and varies in organization, energetic constitution, responsibility, and function. The spirit form is eternal and composed of eternal pure consciousness radiation, which is the eternal conscious vibrating infrasound radiation Galiziac ether substance, or ETHER. The dark matter form is eternal and composed of eternal spirit light matter substance. The light form is finite and composed of electromagnetic vapor radiation substance. The physical form is finite and composed of frozen light, or physical matter, that consists of the internal cells, organs, organ systems, bones, muscles, skin, etc. End quote. Interesting that this is actually quite corroborated with regards to the Mr. Greenstreet interview with Dr. Eric Davis. That, again, this was one of the deleted clips where Dr. Eric Davis from the Admiral Wilson and Davis memo notes that leaked from Edgar Mitchell, Sixth Man to Walk on the Moon, allegedly estate after he passed away, describing the cover-up of these black operations. And I bring this up because Dr. Eric Davis said, and I quote, "The problem is there is no way to legislate this." End quote. What he's referring to generally, okay, folks, is that there's no way for the, I guess you could say, esoteric apparatuses and energetic apparatuses pertaining to these extraterrestrial and interdimensional and delta and paraterrestrial civilizations and beings to be implemented within the surface level of what we deem to be law and policy. Now, why do I say that? I say that because let's take a look at this right over here, okay? Pueblo Center of Massage.com, the Rasha Scalar Plasma Crystalline Sound Harmonizer. The Rasha Scalar Plasma Crystalline Sound Harmonizer is a true scalar plasma energy device with the most advanced frequency generating software. It protects, enhances, and harmonizes the automatic nervous system, ANS, by relieving stressors, transmuting negative habitual patterns, supporting relaxation, aiding in cellular detoxification, and healing from electrosmog and geopathic stress. How does this work? The scalar plasma coil technology harmonizes the body's automatic nervous system via Rife frequencies. Again, Orgone Rife, William Reich, that whole machine there, right? Depending on if you believe that or not. But again, even the James Tilley mind control gang-stalking machine, if you will. We'll get into a little bit of that shortly. Via Rife frequencies while targeting brainwave states that allow the ANS to move from the fight or flight response to a relaxed state. okay? Now again, end quote, before I go on, if this could be used in a positive manner, it could 100% be used in a negative manner, without a shadow of a doubt. But let's take a look at some of the things that this alleged machine actually does. Increases energy levels, reduces physical pain, decreases stressors, creates a sense of joy while clearing grief and depression, improves overall emotional spiritual well-being, clears negative blockages, cleanses and purifies the blood. Again, interestingly enough, cleanses and purifies the blood relative to the Loosh that is being fed on. But anyways, there's much more to this, and I want to make it very clear, I'm not endorsing this product or anything like that. I'm not sure if it can even be obtained or purchased online or anything of the sort. But again, interesting that these types of frequential technologies cannot be acknowledged by those within STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Now, well, let's get into the gang-stalking part. S.A.T.A.N, again, stands for Strategic Alignment of Targeted Assets and Necessities. What's interesting about this is that it seems as though certain individuals are targeted because of the attention given to them relative to the Loosh needed to be fed on by the interdimensional entities. Now, let's give a very recent real-world example, a very modern-day example, so to speak. I'm not saying this is fact. I want to make this very clear, but my humble perspective, Gabby Petito, okay? May she rest in peace. I mean no disrespect to her and her family. However, I am of the opinion that certain instances like this, like Gabby Petito and that whole situation there, in a lot of ways was a form, and I'm not just saying her case, but in general, was a form of an interdimensional sacrifice, and the attention surrounding her and her story were necessary due to the energy needed to put towards her embodiment as an overall sacrifice relative to the certain parts within the RNA splicing from an esoteric aspect and element that, I guess you could say, creates this sort of Loosh feeding feast, if you will. Interestingly enough, if you take a look, folks, at the different types of missing persons cases that make the mainstream media, particularly within North America. I can't say for Europe or Africa or Australia, you name it, but they all occur between October and December. Okay, all of these stories that make the media, I'm not saying the ones that don't, the ones that make the media on a mass level, that all of a sudden the media just inserts in there, like, okay, who's Gabby Petito? What, did you know about her? No, I didn't know about her, but, this YouTube video from CNN's got 30 million views in 3 days, so clearly something's going on there, right? A clear form of a multi-pronged apparatus and distraction. Now, how did they do this? They did this using the S.A.T.A.N satellites. Now, again, interestingly enough, if you, even on DuckDuckGo or the dark web, if you type in S.A.T.A.N satellites, you will find some interesting things surrounding it. However, let's take a look at this right here. Soundlasersholograms.weebly.com, not exactly a mainstream media website. And I quote, "A high-tech weapon system that uses lasers, electromagnetic weapons, and holograms is being used to target people and cause health and psychological problems." Again, microwave weapons, we know about all this too, but gang-stalking is used to destroy every aspect of a victim's life. Sound transmitted in the surrounding is also used to terrorize and manipulate a victim. They target their victims 24/7, causing everyday more implications. How the people are affected, okay? People feel a push or get the feeling there is an air shift. They then start to target different parts of the brain and body with different kinds of energetic weapons, lasers and holograms. Which is why, before I go on, end quote, a lot of people say to me, Dave, when do you think Project Bluebeam is coming? I think it's all around us. I really do think it's all around us, and I would like to thank my friend Top Secret Texan many months ago for bringing this up to me initially, because I don't want to take the credit where it's not due, right? Anyways, let's take a look at this right here. There is a telepathic communication with other persons or other supernatural existences, and even that it is the voice of God or Satan is hard to say. Conversations that took place are being transmitted into the brain many times over, but the conversation is then being changed, and the memories of it are being altered. Brainwashing while someone is asleep. They apply high pressure in the ears, and they use many different frequencies to influence the mood and brain functions. Organs are also being targeted and manipulated with negative vibrations and disturb the natural functions. Again, end quote, which is why a lot of people, when they claim to have been abducted, particularly by a species they deem to be reptilian, okay, camouflaged as humans, so to speak, or maybe a little bit of both, some say hybrid, it's hard to tell. They feel this ringing in their ears, very similar to while they're being abducted from their bed. And many people who have been abducted many times over have said they experience it over and over to the point where they don't even freak out when they're being abducted anymore, because they know what's going to happen. It uses the same scalar wave energy that affects the introns at an exo-atmospheric level that is just outside the atmosphere of the Earth relative to the mind control grid that's occurring here. Now, let's take a look at this right here. This is actually from a Patreon member. Would like to thank you so much. You know who you are. This particular individual took an EMF reader and placed it next to her internet router. She has an apparatus in which seems to block out the different frequencies, and when she places it next to the router, watch how the EMF reader drops. Let's take a look. It's only 31 seconds. See, the EMF reader is picking up some frequencies, right? You see what happens when she puts it right there? Yep. You guys see that? it all of a sudden drops as if something is blocking it, because there are frequencies in which we are not aware of that are occurring all around us, which is why, to be quite frank with all of you folks, when people say, you know, is this pandemic doing anything, I can't really say too much publicly. There's much more to discuss on the members episodes, but the point is, ultimately, it adds to it in a lot of ways, and that's the most I could probably say without getting this episode banned. Anyways, let's take a look at the sun.com. This just came out yesterday. DEFCON 1. I saw giant UFO disable 10 live nukes at top secret base, and Pentagon is covering it up, says U.S. Air Force captain. Again, very basic fundamentals of critical thinking. We entrust these individuals to defend the respective nations in which you live, but the second they start talking about aliens, they're cuckoo. We have to play devil's advocate. Granted, they could be disinformation agents, but I highly doubt this one, and you'll see why. Let's take a look at this right here. This is Robert Salas, who claims to have witnessed 10 nuclear missiles be taken offline by a UFO. He has spoken up before, but let's take a look, and I quote, Captain Salas said the bizarre incident unfolded on March 24, 1967 in Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, U.S. While he was on duty, he was the on-duty commander of a secret underground launch control facility. Speaking to the Sun Online, I was in charge of 10 nuclear missiles at the time when a UFO came over and hovered over our facility, and while it was hovering there, it was seen by all our guards. I was underground 60 feet. Now keep in mind, folks, remember the number 6, the examples that I gave at the very beginning. Not so much a satanic reference, although possible, relative to this episode, but more of an energetic scalar wave reference. So let's take a look. I was underground 60 feet, locked into a concrete capsule. It was reported to me directly by those guards. While the object was up there, we lost all 10 missiles due to guidance and control failures. The attack implied a level of sophistication which no human at the time possessed, he claims. The missiles went into the no-go condition, which means he couldn't have launched them even if he wanted to. Okay, end quote. The reason for this being so significant is because of this right here, howandwise.com. Ancient Sanskrit texts reveal that beings from Earth, from other planets visited Earth 6,000 years ago. Interestingly enough, again, the number 6. I'm not saying this is bad, but I'm not also saying this is good. So let's take a look here if we scroll down. Apart from the Sumerians and Egyptians, the ancient, and I quote, the ancient Indian civilization also had advanced technology. Ancient Sanskrit manuscripts say that flying ships visited the continent over 6,000 years ago. A Sanskrit scholar from Madras University, Dr. V. Raghavan, who was passed away in 1979, was convinced that centuries-old documents in Sanskrit prove that aliens from outer space visited Earth. 50 years of researching these ancient works convinces that there are living beings on other planets and that they visited Earth as far back as 4000 BC. Alright, there was just a mass of fascinating information about flying machines, even fantastic science fiction weapons that can be found in translation of the Vedas, scriptures, Indian epics, and other ancient Sanskrit texts, end quote. Now we see here, what's allegedly to be the description, shape, and the blueprints of what we now know to be Vimanas as defined relative to the modern day terms that we give meaning to. Now, the thing I want to bring up more specifically here, folks, is when you take a look at the UFOs that disable the nukes, you take a look at these beings coming roughly 6,000 years ago, you're going to notice a reoccurrence relative to the numbers in which we see here, right? Now, interestingly enough, what we're also going to notice too is that certain nuclear weapons need to be deactivated prior to, okay, whether humans know this or not, at this point I'm pretty sure they do, but prior to there being some mass event for Loosh feeding. The reason is, I think, folks, that the nuclear weapons, okay, even at the subatomic structure before the atom is split, if it were to ever be launched in a hypothetical situation, they emit certain frequencies that are also being emitted from this right over here. And I quote, airandspace.si.edu, Pluto's unusual orbit. Okay, there are frequencies surrounding Pluto at this certain point in time in which are creating an anomalistically, I guess you could say, shaped orbit surrounding the way in which Pluto orbits in a certain regard. So take a look, and I quote, it takes 248 years for Earth years for Pluto to complete one orbit around the Sun. Its orbital path doesn't lie in the same plane as the 8 planets, but is inclined at an angle of 17 degrees. Technically speaking, it's 16.8. This article just rounded it up. Again, the number 6, you see that reoccurrence. Its orbit is also more oval-shaped or elliptical than those of the planets. That means that sometimes Pluto is a lot nearer to the Sun than at other times, right? The last time this happened was from 1979 to 1999. It won't happen again until 2227, excuse me. Like the planet Uranus, Pluto rotates on its side, its axis tilted about 120 degrees, end quote. I'm not trying to randomly make numbers up, but what's 120 split in half? 60. You see the number 6 again, reoccurring over and over and over here. Now, here's the next thing I wanted to cover as well too, because I find it to be extremely of deep significance relative to what we're looking at here. The same frequencies being emitted off of the electromagnetic orbit relative to Pluto and all that we see here are also being emitted from the ore mines in which China is mining for. And how do we know this? Asia.Nikkei.com, excuse me if I butcher that. China's opportunities and risks in Africa's giant iron ore field. Okay, Guinea region holds world's largest untapped reserves but lacks infrastructure. All right, interestingly enough, take a look at this. Miningweekly.com. What do we see here? China steelmaker HBIS lines up investment in Peru iron ore mine. This is interesting because the same way in which the CCP, not the Chinese people, again, the Chinese Communist Party's machines, are looking and mining for these iron ores within these particular regions that emit the same frequencies of that of which are used in gang-stalking in some cases, that in which we see being emitted from Pluto, the planet Pluto relative to the electromagnetic orbit of it all, and that we see via to the introns within gene splicing, we'll find here as well, if we take a look at this screenshot, again, from Twitter, again, this is also from Phobos, this .arizona.edu, so clearly it's a quote-unquote official source if you want to call it that. Mars's moon Phobos. Notice the metallic-looking surface and complex grooving. A previous ESA mission found Phobos to be hollow and leaking heat. There are no known geological processes that create linear, complex grooving seen on Phobos. End quote. The reason for this, folks, is because the same apparatus is being used by the CCP scavenging for the iron ores, if you want to call it, within Guinea and certain parts of the world, is because they are using the same machines relative to what the ICC, corporate conglomerates use, that mine certain comets, that mine certain moons all around not just our galaxy but other galaxies as well, that a lot of people may say, Dave, that's a bit of a far stretch. Well, again, folks, if there is a human representation within that of the Galactic Federation, non-relative and irrespective of that of the Asian people, the Russian people, the American people, it's all human. It doesn't matter at this point. It's just, yes, granted, it's speculated that the German and Americans tend to have the most within the secret space program, the most apparatuses and institutions relative to the guidance of the power structure here on Earth. But ultimately, we find this to be very, very similar to what seem to be leaked photos on the dark web of, again, certain, comets being mined and things like that. And also that particular star, if you will, or whatever it was, the Mars moon, I wanted to get that right, is being extracted from inside out, similar to that in which we see Leonid Ivashov's book discussing Walter Russell, the universal one, the way in which everything is magnetism, so to speak, right? Now, take a look at this right over here, targetedevidence.com, organized stalking, contract stalking, and gang stalking. Senior Special Agent Ted Gunderson illegally targeted FBI whistleblower, okay? FBI whistleblower Senior Special Agent Ted Gunderson, who oversaw 26 FBI offices, signed a notarized affidavit under oath on April 26, 2011 in federal district court. The affidavit in Labella v. Federal Bureau of Investigation et al. Case number 12011 blah 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 stated that the FBI is involved with illegal targeting activity including gang stalking, organized stalking, illegal surveillance, harassment, surreptitious entry into home and vehicle, illegal spy cameras, financial sabotage, slander campaign, poisoning, murder, drug setups, and more, end quote. Now, again, we can go on about, again, the surveillance, the assaults by directed energy weapons, but this is also used via that of a corresponding fusion cell, which was an episode I probably did about a year and a half ago at this point, if I'm not mistaken, pertaining to a different compartment of the FBI, because you can't have all the FBI employees walking around knowing about this, right? It certainly doesn't make sense. Now, take a look at this right over here. Wikipedia.org, Space Tether Mission. A number of space tethers, have been deployed in space missions. Tether satellites can be used for various purposes, including research into tether propulsion, tidal stabilization, and orbital plasma dynamics. This was somewhat covered in the recent Patreon long-form members episode with Rained Out Rantcast. Thank you so much, brother, for bringing this up. The missions have met with varying degrees of success. A few have been highly successful. Tethered satellites are composed of 3 parts: the base satellite, tether, and sub-satellite. The base satellite contains the sub-satellite and tether until deployment. Now, a lot of people say, okay, what are we looking at here, Dave? And why is this even, remotely being used or being referenced and brought up, end quote. Well, if we take a look at this right over here, torturednow.wordpress.com, sleep deprivation, all right, we'll see here, and I quote, may sound quite tame in comparison with other forms of torture, but it is one of the most brutal and is so effective it is used by CIA on prisoners of war. okay? In the hands of an expert interrogator, it quickly renders someone open to suggestion while reducing resistance to physical pain and psychological functions, end quote. What we're finding here, folks, is that these tether apparatuses that were put out in the 90s were the original formations of the dissemination of the RNA, I guess you could say, intron, relative to the Loosh feeding that is occurring from an interdimensional level from the archons, slightly above Earth's atmosphere if we were to place it in a physical distance relative to Earth's orbit and all that too, utilizing the same frequencies that are being emitted from Pluto that we find to be the case with the CCP mining these iron ores, if you want to call it, right? Now, again, there's much more benefits to that on a more human level, but aside from that, we will also find too, these are the same frequencies, by the way, being emitted off of that book that those on Patreon know I'm referring to, pertaining to, I'm going to say the initials KH at the border, but I got to be very careful because I don't want to get, I guess you could say, taken off. Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, these tether satellites are what we would call the S.A.T.A.N satellites, which is why it's so difficult to find out what's going on. And recently, a book, I believe, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon or something like this, if I'm not mistaken, had come out and also substantiates this and ascertains the veracity of it to a larger extent. Excuse me. But these tether satellites were used as an initial formation and operation of Loosh feeding. Okay, very similar to the way in which during the 80s in the Reagan administration, when the secret space program was really ramping up, they used to use submarines before they could build their own cigar-shaped UFO or a reverse-engineered extraterrestrial craft. They used submarines by placing certain electromagnetic frequencies around the submarines in order to make it work, similar to when, comparative to how when Ronald Reagan said at the time to William Casey on the record accidentally, he goes, wow, I can't believe we have 300 people in space. Again, when did we have 300 people in space? It's the same idea that's being used here. The tether satellites were multi-purposeful. They were used for gang-stalking. They were used for the Loosh feeding. And when gang-stalking is an apparatus that doesn't seem to work as much due to certain individuals becoming more enlightened at a mass level, what do these beings have to do, therefore, and what do they have to give the orders to the humans down below and sort of work it down the line, so to speak? They have to make up cases, or they have to create cases, rather, I should say, excuse me, like the Gabby Petito case. Again, not trying to defame, not trying to slander by any stretch of the metric whatsoever. May she rest in peace. But my point is ultimately that, again, you find the dissemination of the way in which sacrifices occur to be quite interesting. And that's what we refer to when we say EXO-ATMOSPHERIC in the title of this episode, because these interdimensional beings cannot feed relative to the orbital planet and magnetic pull within Earth, because as low and as dense as the current vibratory state is at this moment in time, there is still enough positive energy being emitted by a handful of individuals around the world, such as yourself and myself, I would like to think probably, or hopefully at least, that these beings must feed just outside the planet. So, with that being said, folks, let me know what you think, and we'll catch you very, very soon. Cheers.